So now we come to chapter 7. Jerubbaal and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. I want to stop right there real quick and bring this up before you. When I look at the things the Lord impressed on our hearts regarding the future of the church, and I envision many more people added to the table at the wedding feast of the Lamb. Sometimes when I look in my life, when I look in our lives, and I see the inconsistencies and sometimes the lack of faith and faithfulness, I'm tempted to think, Lord, but really, can it be? We would glorify Jesus as one, that we would raise servant leaders, advance the biblical family at a time when really the whole family unit is being destroyed. That we would have such peace and unity that the Spirit could create through us new ministries, new music, in spirit and in truth. See, that comes where there is this unity and love for Christ and peace among the people that can spring forth. And that we would evangelize boldly. And by boldly, I mean not just to start out boldly, but when it gets tough, when it's hard, when maybe the response is not like we've imagined it to be. See, especially in 21st century America, we're used to instant responses, right? We don't like our internet to be slow. We don't like our phones to be slow. I press on it immediately. It's got to do 50 things right away. And making disciples is not a fast process. It's a lifelong process. Because disciples, they're not born. Sons and daughters are born again by the Spirit of God. But disciples are made. And they're made in time. And they're made through testing. And they're made through modeling. And they're made through healthy relationships. I'm not looking just for numbers, right? Converts. No, but the converts that continue, that develop the character of Christ, and they multiply that. Not just shallow faith, but deep faith. I find great comfort in this story here from the history of Israel, where I see how God did it, because this is a work of God. So it is possible because it is a work of God. So here's a definition of faith tonight. Faith is believing the Word of God. It starts with the Word of God. And then what? Acting rightly on it. Undeterred by feelings. Because it may not feel good sometimes. Or it may not feel like it's moving or it's happening. Or it may not feel comfortable. Undeterred by feelings. Why? Because God promises a good outcome. I really like that definition. I learned it from an older pastor. Faith is believing the Word of God and acting rightly on it, undeterred by feelings, because God promises a good outcome. How are we doing with our faith? God promises to add people at that great and glorious table and to use us in the process. When He sent us to go and make disciples, He didn't give us an impossible task. But He did give us a task that can only be done by faith, by living the life of faith. So, 3 things tonight as we look at faith and how God developed faith in Gideon's life. 3 principles that may help us discern where we're at with our own faith in the Lord. First thing is that God always works to refine our faith. The faith that we have when we come and place our trust in Jesus will be continuously refined. And how does God refine our faith? By testing it. By testing it. He's putting it to tests. Notice in the passage, verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. Then 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. All right, Gideon, you put God to the test twice. Here's God putting you to the test twice. 2 tests for God, 2 tests for Gideon. And they are tests of his faith. Now, at any given time, when God brings tests in our lives, he has multiple purposes. He works on 1,000+ things at the same time. Sometimes we wonder, I was having this conversation with someone close to my heart. It's like, why did this happen in my day? Why couldn't my day just go smooth? Like, I asked God for help, right? And then it's the hardest day. A simple answer you can always give yourself, God is testing my faith. God is testing my faith. And he's doing 1,000 other things, and he may be testing many other people at the same time through the same action, because God has a way of arranging and holding things and perspectives that far exceed our mind. But in that test is an opportunity for my faith to be refined, to be strengthened. And look, what does God look for in all the tests? Is that we would recognize who he is, what he's like. God didn't want Israel to do what? To boast, to think that they did it by their hand. Warning, church, for us. Acum zic și în românește. Avertizare pentru noi. Avem în mâinile noastre multe resurse pe care tot Dumnezeu le-a pus acolo. Cu atenție, să nu cumva să credem că prin mâna noastră. Yeah. Și uite că Dumnezeu îi testează, i-a testat pe ei și ne va testa și pe noi. Doamne, ajută-ne să trecem testul credinței. The people with you are too many. Okay, so here's Gideon, right? Now he's becoming this captain. He goes from hiding to now 30,000 people came out to fight. Now, by comparison with the Midianites, they were still outnumbered. Okay, the Midianites were about 135,000, and the people of God were about 32,000. And then in one test, he loses 22,000. And notice the reason why they were sent back home? Because they were what? Fearful. Fearful. Now again, as I said, in any test, God works on many levels. Was God keeping his word here? He was. In Deuteronomy, you find a passage that talks about the fact that if you're afraid, if you're fearful, you should not go to the battle. Because your fear will infect others. So was God actually keeping his word, working according to his word? Now he's also inviting Gideon to respect the word of God, to trust in it, right? God said, don't send people to battle who are filled with fear. That's not my soldiers. So now Gideon had a choice to make. Am I going to trust the word of God? Am I going to believe in his promises, act rightly on them, undeterred by my own feelings of, man, I'm losing 22,000 people, right? Fear. Because God promises a good outcome. You see how there was a test, and this was a test of faith. And Gideon lets the people go. It's interesting in Hebrew to realize that the spring of Harod, and I read it that way because in Hebrew, that means trembling, that word. And it's very possible that it was named afterwards because there were a lot of people trembling. Because they were looking at the odds at the human level, and they're like, no way we come out of this victorious, right? They were just looking at a horizontal level. They were not thinking about God. They were not thinking about the difference that God makes. They were not thinking about the word of God. No, they were just looking at the great danger that was coming their way, which all of us and any of us would have a similar reaction of fear. But faith helps us overcome fear. So those were the kinds of people that God was looking for. 22,000 are sent back. And then test number 2 comes, all right? The Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Take them down to the water, and I will, here's the word, test them. For you, God is helping his commander by minimizing his fighting force. Really, Lord? Or maybe elevating his fighting force from fearful people, from distracted people, to focused, faithful people, the 300. Focused and faith-filled. Because those 300 had to believe the same word that Gideon, their commander, believed, that the Lord would give Midian in their hands. The test comes, as you probably know, I'll read it here, the number. Likewise, everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hand. Let all the others go, every man to his home. Gideon did this. He retained the 300. And then it says the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. So God reduces, or God elevates his fighting force to faithful, focused men. These men, there's many interpretations of what this test meant. I just take it as God wanted to test him this way. He just wanted the 300 that displayed at some level readiness for fighting. Okay, readiness to fight. They were focused. They knew they had a mission. And ultimately it's because God wanted to show off. God wanted to show what he can do with a few that take him at his word. That's what it is. It's a faith in action. Faith in action. So God refines our faith. He will always test our faith. If you find yourself in a time of trouble, it may very well be that God is testing your faith in his promises. And then God calls us to believe his word, to act on it, because he promises a good outcome, right? There's power that comes through that. That's not the only thing that God does, though. And I want you to see next in Gideon's life, starting in verse 9, is that God actually refuels our faith. Do we sometimes run low on faith? Yeah. Sometimes as it's tested, you feel like, and I wonder how Gideon probably felt as he now looked upon 300 from 30,000. Like 30,000. That same night the Lord said to him, to Gideon, arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. Was Gideon afraid still? Would you be? I would. 135,000. of the men who for the last 7 years have raided and destroyed your land. And now you're going to go against them with 300? So the Lord knew. He saw that he was low. He was running low again on faith. And I take again comfort for that because God knows us. He knows our frame, it says the word of the Lord. Te știe și pe tine. Te știe când vine tăvălugul ce se întâmplă cu credința ta, ce se întâmplă cu credința mea, cum ni se poate micșora. Și îi pasă. Și El găsește căi ca să ne reîncarce credința. You notice this is what He's doing here. God is taking care of his captain here. And he is refueling his faith. And the way he's doing it is by a revelation. So he's taking him into the camp. And he says, I know you're afraid, so take your servant with you. But what I'm going to show you is how I'm going to give this into your hands. I'm going to do it. Blessed be his name. This is just the grace of God. Yeah, and it's very humbling for Gideon. And when God refuels your faith, one of the things that you will know that this is God refueling my faith is because he will humble you. He will show you who he is. And it's so good for the soul. So when Gideon came, behold, a man was telling, I'm reading verse 13, was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream. And behold, a cake of barley bread, a cake of barley bread, tumbled into the camp of Midian and came to the tent and struck it so that it fell and turned it upside down so that the tent lay flat. And his comrade answered, this is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp. So God allows Gideon to hear a dream. Is this God in control or what? Who has the ability to control dreams? Cine poate să controleze visele? And he intervened at the right time. We can always trust God to bring about a good outcome. He has his ways. He always has his ways. What he is asking of us is to trust him, to have faith in him. And it was humbling for Gideon, because here he was, Commander Gideon, that garnered 30,000 people. And in the dream, what was he compared to? A biscuit. A biscuit, a barley biscuit. Niște biscuiți. Humbling. But that little barley cake, not commander, but cake, Gideon, in the hands of mighty God, yields an incredible victory. Now notice the way Gideon responds, and I made the point to say, verse 15, that this is where Gideon finally worships God with the full heart of faith, is right here. As Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, the word says here, he worshiped. It's really, he fell to the ground, face down, worshiped the Lord. He was humbled to the ground. So when the Lord refuels our faith, he humbles us. And oh, how I welcome that in my own life. And I pray you do the same. In these great battles that you're facing, the Lord will refuel your faith. And he will humble you. And then as he rose up, see, when you rise up after having worshiped the Lord, look at the courage in him. And he returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, we're doing this now against 135,000. But we're with God. God is at work here. Oh, Lord, bring these revelations in us, Lord, in our midst, Lord, so that we may step forward by faith. Yeah. Arise, for the Lord has given. This is faith, okay? This is faith now expressed, acted out. It has given the host of Midian into your hand. He divided the 300 into 3 companies and put trumpets into the hands of all of them and empty jars with torches inside the jars. There's so much symbolism here. I'd love to go into it further, but our time has gone. So I'll give you the last thing that I see the Lord do here, and it's really from verse 15 all the way down to verse 25, where the great victory is recorded, is that God rewards faith. He refuels the faith, right? You step into the fight, and then you see God rewarding faith. He gave him the wisdom of what to do with the jars, what to do with the lights, what to do with the trumpets, how to position the men, right? This was the reward. E a recompensa pe care Dumnezeu o dă. And it has a great outcome. The entire camp is thrown into debacle. They start fighting one another, and they win this battle in that valley without having to do anything other than worship God. The pursuit now, and the word records here, that all those men that were sent back are now called again to participate in the victory. And I love that image. And I'm going to close with this. You see 300 men who took God at his word, stepped into it by faith. They had their faith tested, right? Had their faith refined. They had their faith refueled by the Lord, and they had their faith rewarded. Because part of that reward was great impact and influence on all those other fearful ones. The 30,000, very possible they came back. And they went back from 300, but now that faith spread to 30,000. How do you like that? 100x result, a great outcome. Who's going to be? Who's going to take God at his word? Do you want to be one of the 300? Do I want to be one of the 300? As we look down the passage of time, however long the Lord gives us before he returns, man, I want to use it with the same faith that Gideon and the 300 had and see a great harvest rise. So help us, God. Let's all stand.